Okay, so quick introduction. My name is Lindsay. I am the new program development manager at the Women's Center of Halton. So I will be talking about how to spot a narcissist, what is narcissistic personality disorder, effects of being in a narcissistic relationship, and kind of a little bit of a narcissism dictionary. Rika will be talking about rocking your confidence, exploring what your superpower is. And then Christine will be talking about her story a little bit and then sharing an activity called the Circle of Life and doing some affirmations with us. So let's jump into how to spot a narcissist. So NPD is narcissistic personality disorder. And I think a lot of us have heard the word narcissist a million times, and it can be used out of context a little bit. So I just want to talk about what is narcissism and what is narcissistic personality disorder, the differences between them. Narcissism is a personality trait, pretty much like any other personality trait. It exists on a spectrum. So just like being angry or sad, we can be a little angry or sad sometimes, just like we can be a little bit narcissistic at times. Narcissistic personality disorder, on the other hand, is a mental illness that can be diagnosed by a psychiatrist or clinical psychologist. And that's when somebody falls on that extreme end of that narcissism spectrum. So a personality disorder is a way of thinking, feeling, or behaving that deviates from kind of the norm or expectations in our general culture. And it usually causes distress, problems functioning, and persists over a long period of time. So you've probably maybe heard people talking about different categories of narcissism. So some people might say there's 2 types of narcissism, overt and covert. Some people might say there's 5 types that include antagonistic, communal, and malignant. What I found when I was doing research on narcissism is that it seems to be split on exactly how many different categories there are and what exactly those categories are. The DSM only recognizes general narcissistic personality disorder as a mental illness, but I think the important thing to take away from these different categories being talked about is that narcissism can manifest differently in everybody. So while there's only one recognized mental illness, it'll look different in different people. So psychologists and psychiatrists use pretty much this big book called the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, the DSM, as a tool to assist in diagnosing individuals with any mental illness. So the book explains symptoms, etiology, which is just like a fancy word for causation, and treatment for every recognized illness that's in the book. So I'm quickly just going to go over these 3 categories for narcissism. So while we aren't clinicians, most of us, or any of us probably, I think, there are 9 symptoms and characteristics that we can kind of use to identify narcissists, though we can't really diagnose anybody, again, because we're not clinicians. But these are 9 common characteristics or symptoms that people with NPD may display. And I think that whether or not your partner or loved one or whoever has an NPD diagnosis, I think that if you can look through these lists and find that you can kind of identify several in your partner or friend or whoever it may be, it's likely that they're on the higher end of the narcissism spectrum, and you may find that that has a negative impact on your relationship with them. So we'll just go over this list quickly. So 9 of the common characteristics are a grandiose sense of self-importance, preoccupation with fantasies of success, power, brilliance, beauty, or love, beliefs that you're unique and should only associate with other high status people, requiring excessive admiration, having a sense of entitlement, is interpersonally exploitative, lacking empathy or unwilling to recognize the feelings or needs of others, being envious of others or believing that other people are envious of them, or showing arrogant, haughty behaviors or attitudes. So again, those are just kind of 9 common characteristics that someone with NPD may have, or someone who kind of falls on the higher end of the narcissism spectrum may have. So what causes someone to have NPD? Generally, the answer to that is unknown, like with many other mental illnesses in the DSM. It's likely a combination of genetic, neurobiological, and environmental factors. So in terms of genetics, there could be a combination of genes inherited from both parents. However, there isn't a specific combination that has been identified yet, at least. And then neurobiological factors refer to the connection between the brain and behaviors, so neurotransmitters or hormones. And you've maybe heard of serotonin or dopamine being connected to depression or other mental illnesses. So it would be something along those lines. And then in terms of environmental factors, we're looking at excessive admiration or excessive criticism during childhood or development, as well as experiencing abuse or trauma. And for most people with NPD, there's underlying feelings of shame, insecurity, vulnerability, and humiliation. And they kind of create this narcissistic persona to hide or mask that lack of self-esteem that they have deep down. And you may have wondered about the possibility of treating NPD or asked yourself, can they change? Will our relationship improve? Or something along those lines. And to be honest, NPD is very, very difficult to treat for one main reason, and that is that individuals with NPD are very unlikely to admit that they have any sort of problem. So psychotherapy can be very effective, but it's a long and slow process, and it requires that individual to willingly accept that they have a problem, show up, and do the work. There aren't any current medication, at least that I know of, that mitigate symptoms of NPD specifically, but there are medications that can alleviate comorbid illnesses such as depression. So that would be if somebody has NPD and depression, there are medications that can work for depression. And then in terms of couples therapy, that also is generally not recommended based on the grounds that therapists try to remain neutral in couples therapy and not take one side over the other person's side. And this can be uncomfortable for somebody who feels that they're in a manipulative or abusive relationship. And not only that, but because narcissists can come off as very charming, they may actually be able to kind of win the therapist over for a number of reasons. That being in a relationship with a narcissist can be very, very negative, can negatively impact mental health. So that takes me to effects of being in a narcissistic relationship. Being in a narcissistic relationship can have a negative impact on mental health. It can shrink your social circles through the manipulation. It can harm your future relationships by kind of changing your perception of what a healthy relationship looks like. It can make you lose touch with yourself and your own interests, deplete your self-esteem, and have a bunch of other negative impacts on your mental health. And that is why therapy can be so, so beneficial for people who have been in a relationship with a narcissist or have a parent who is, or a friend or a family member. Therapy can be really beneficial for you. So you might be thinking, why do people begin a relationship with a narcissist in the first place? And I like to say that they don't. Most people don't really start a relationship with a narcissist. They start a relationship with someone who's charming, intelligent, nice, funny, and almost seems too good to be true sometimes. Because narcissists can put on this very intriguing and charming facade for people who they just meet, and it takes a while before they start revealing kind of their harmful behaviors. And by this time, you may already be invested in that relationship with that person. And I think it's just important to say that people don't begin a relationship with a narcissist because we can kind of place blame on ourselves and think, I put myself in this position. But really you didn't. You couldn't have known. The person in the beginning seemed great, and it just took that time until those behaviors started coming out. So I just wanted to go over some common terminology that surrounds the conversation about narcissism. And I'm going to give a couple examples of each item, which might help you kind of identify these behaviors in partners, friends, or family as well. So love bombing is excessive attention, admiration, and affection with the goal to make the recipient feel dependent or obligated to that person. And this is used especially in the beginning of relationships to make the person feel good. And it feels good to the recipient. You're getting that attention that you really wanted or needed. But in the end, it turns out to be a manipulation tactic. So the love bombing is about kind of getting that person. And once they get them, there's a switch where they can become manipulative. So some signs of love bombing are extravagant gifts, obsessive flattery, or constant compliments. And then we have gaslighting, which I'm sure some of you have heard. And this is another manipulation tactic in which the person tries to make you doubt your reality and confuse your reality. So examples of that would be, say you're in a conversation with somebody that you're upset about something that they did. And they're saying that never happened, you're crazy, you're making that up. So they're trying to make you kind of question yourself and think, did it happen? And that can be harmful. And another example of this is insisting that you did something that you know you really didn't do, but it can, again, just make you kind of question yourself. Breadcrumbing is when somebody gives you crumbs of attention or affection to give you hope and keep you on the hook, but it's not really enough for a fulfilling relationship. So signs of this are that you feel like you're giving more into the relationship than you're getting, that they're being hot and cold. So maybe they're really good to you one day, but then it takes a whole nother week of just kind of cold behavior from them before they're really good to you another day. And it's just not enough for a fulfilling relationship, but they're keeping you on that hook. And another sign is that you're confused about how they feel about you, which is just, again, that kind of hot and cold. You don't really know where they're at. And that's another thing that narcissists will sometimes use, breadcrumbing. Gray rocking is a technique used to divert a toxic person's behavior by acting unresponsive when you're interacting with them. So pretty much the idea here is to act like an unresponsive, uninteresting gray rock. And this is a method used to leave relationships with a narcissist. So the goal here is that the narcissist kind of leaves the relationship thinking it's their own idea that the relationship is over, when really you kind of were the one that was trying to make that happen. The only kind of risk of this is that it can aggravate the person instead of having that goal that you're looking for, and it can impact your own self-image. So if you're always pretending that you're this unresponsive, uninteresting gray rock, you might start to believe that about yourself, and that's not something that we would ever want. We want everybody to be confident in themselves. And another thing is this can maybe not be the best choice if you are in court for shared custody of children. So instead, yellow rocking is similar to gray rocking, but it's kind of like you sprinkle in a little polite common courtesy. So you might need to initiate interactions if you're talking about who's picking kids up from school. You want to use like, please, thank you, hello. And this can kind of just make courts view you as a more warm and cooperative person than if you're using the gray rocking technique. And both of these techniques are things that have been shared by other people who've been in narcissistic relationships, but I don't want you to take away as I'm telling you to do this if you're in a narcissistic relationship. I just wanted to share some kind of techniques that other people have used. Narcissistic abuse syndrome is a condition that occurs when a person has been living with or spending a significant amount of time with a narcissist. This isn't a condition that's recognized by the DSM, but it is commonly referred to by individuals who've experienced narcissistic manipulation or abuse. And some common characteristics of this are doubting your self-worth or sanity, concerns about flaws, failures, or shortcomings, feeling isolated, feeling extremely alert or vigilant at all times, and that's just from feeling like you're always on the defense, and having intrusive thoughts. And again, these are some of the reasons why therapy or support groups or social circles can be so beneficial for people who have been in a close relationship with someone who has narcissistic behaviors. And then there's one other question in the chat. Can both people benefit from therapy? So the point that I was really trying to get across is that therapy can really be beneficial for people who have experienced a relationship with a narcissist because of how much it can impact your mental health. People who have narcissistic behaviors, or specifically NPD, they can benefit from therapy. Therapy is a great thing, and I think anybody can benefit from therapy, but the issue is that most of the time people with NPD won't admit that they need to go to therapy, and that is kind of a block from being able to access that treatment.
If I can intercept with that question, because since I have experience in this department that I'm going to be sharing later, the problem is, even if they agree to go, someone that suffers from a narcissistic personality disorder, they actually don't see their bad behavior. They think they're perfect. They think they're great. They see themselves as grandiose and amazing. So they think they're going for you, not for them. And unfortunately, very few of them can benefit from therapy or change at all. So I'm going to speak a little bit more about my experience with it later, but it's very unfortunate. You have to understand, no matter how much you love them and you want to help them change, that they can't change. They don't change, most likely, most often.
Yes, thank you, Christine. And then Ifra just shared in the chat also that we also have a family law workshop coming up in 2 weeks. So that's in person in the office called Family Law 101. So she sent the link that you can use to sign up. So NPD is going to be like the very end of the spectrum of narcissistic behaviors. I think it is kind of difficult. I understand there where you're coming from to tell the difference. But I think what's important is that if the person has narcissistic traits and you think that's negatively impacting your relationship, I'm not sure if the distinction is super necessary. At that point, either way, it's this person has these behaviors and it's negatively impacting your relationship, if that kind of makes sense. In order to know for sure if somebody does have NPD, they would require a formal diagnosis from whether that be a psychiatrist or a clinical psychologist. No problem. So I think we can move on to Rika now. She is our next presenter. So let me just go on to her presentation here.